Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. I'm not crying, you're crying. And in anticipation for the release of the third season of The Bad Batch, I thought we could take a look at what was happening in the wider galaxy in 18BBY so we can know what's at stake in this final season. The year is 18BBY. The Empire has officially celebrated its first year in existence. The end of the war, along with Emperor Palpatine's promise to bring peace and stability to the galaxy, keeps most of the citizens of the Empire relatively happy and focused on reconstruction efforts. But because there are less checks and balances on the federal government, the Empire begins to slip up. It starts being a little bit oppressive, and the seeds of rebellion are planted all across the galaxy. Now, thanks to the last season of The Bad Batch and efforts of Senator Rio Chuchi, we're finally seeing some discussion in the Senate about the rights of clones and what should be done with them now that the war has ended and they've all served very bravely for the Republic. But hardly anyone talks about the other group that fought in the Clone Wars. We, of course, are talking about all the droids. Droids served not only in frontline combat positions for the Confederacy of Independent Systems, but were also integral to both military forces, logistics, and support network. You had astromechs aiding pilots with energy management and hyperspace jump coordinates, medical droids that could perform basic procedures and monitor patients. You had heavy-duty droids for dock work and transportation of supplies onto and off Republic warships. The list goes on and on. The Empire had a very ambitious plan to upgrade the entire Imperial military, though, and that means getting rid of a lot of droids as well. And since the Separatist droid army was so ruthless and hated on the battlefield, an anti-droid sentiment began to arise all across the galaxy, especially in the Outer Rim, where most of the worst battles were fought. It became incredibly hard for droid veterans to find meaningful work and employment. And guess what happens, guys, when you have a bunch of soldiers with their skills and weapons intact, but no army or conflict to fight in? Well, they become extremely dangerous. A lot of these droid veterans would actually serve within various criminal cartels and organizations as muscle. A lot of them would join the Chimera Syndicate. And another group of droids in the industrial wasteland in the Undercity of Coruscant would form a group known as the Droid Gotra. This criminal organization supposedly supported droid emancipation and committed crimes in order to raise credits for that movement. I'm sure L337 would have approved. The Droid Gotra was the main droid syndicate, but it actually had a sprawling network of other smaller families and, crime bosses beneath it. For instance, there was the Vanguard Axis. They were loosely associated with Droid Gotra. They're the guys who caught the Jedi youngling Gungi and were attempting to sell him to some wealthy buyer. Despite having many grievances against the Galactic Empire, the Droid Gotra never joins forces with the Rebel Alliance, and this could be, some ideological differences between the two groups. The Rebel Alliance didn't really enslave their droids. The Rebel Alliance tended to treat their droids quite well, but sometimes they did memory wipe them, which I guess the Droid Gotra really didn't like. In the months leading up to the end of the Clone Wars, the Delegation in 2000 was formed within the Republic Senate. This was a group of senators who were concerned that Supreme Chancellor Chief Palpatine would not give up his emergency powers with the end of the conflict. This group would sign a petition demanding that Emperor Palpatine would give back all of the executive powers he had taken from the Senate at the beginning of the war. Unfortunately, a lot of these guys had just signed their own death warrants. 63 senators would be immediately arrested for treason and conspiracy against the Empire. Now, some senators like Bail Organa of Alderaan and Mon Mothma of Chandrila were popular enough that it afforded them with some protection, and so they would maintain their position within the Empire, where they could actively work against Palpatine in plain sight. Mon Mothma in 18BBY would begin to secretly funnel money from her own personal accounts to various anti-imperial movements. Bail Organa would also do the same, and in 18BBY, he would convince Ahsoka Tano to join the fight against the Empire as an intelligence operative. Previously, Ahsoka had been hiding on the planet of Rada, but after she blew her cover by killing an Inquisitor, Ahsoka had to remove the entire population from that village to somewhere safe, and of course, Bail Organa opens up Alderaan to more refugees. And all throughout the Imperial era, more and more refugees would land on Alderaan, making its destruction that much sadder. In 18BBY, the Empire would continue to kind of test the boundaries of what they can do and what the public would accept. But Emperor Palpatine is quickly running out of patience and wants to make it clear that the choice to join the Empire was not really a choice at all, which is a big problem for a lot of the more independent worlds in the galaxy. The ocean planet of Mon Cala lies far out in the Outer Rim, but its famous shipyards, underwater agriculture, and mineral deposits made it quite famous to the wider galaxy. The Empire was in the midst of trade negotiations with the monarch, King Li Char. The Empire wanted cheap raw materials in massive quantities for its growing industrial manufacturing complex. Li Char found the prices given to him by Imperial ambassadors to be far lower than market rates, and therefore he wasn't keen on signing the agreement. Simultaneously, Wilhuff Tarkin was in orbit with the Star Destroyer Sovereign and discussing different ways that the Empire could undermine the power of the monarch and take over the planet. Now, Tarkin's ISB advisor, Commander Jordo, suggests a propaganda campaign designed to create tensions between the two primary races on the planet, the Korans and the Mon Calamari. Kind of like how foreign entities bombard our social media in an attempt to turn Americans against each other. Propaganda campaigns are cute, but Colonel Bergen quickly points out that they were standing on a mile-long ship designed for orbital bombardment, and Tarkin, ironically, replies with this quote: "The power of an empire is not in what it destroys, but what it controls." Mon Cala is a valuable world in many ways, its people, technology, and civilization. Why, Emperor Palpatine himself enjoys the Mon Calamari aquatic ballet. We will not destroy it, not without cause. He's talking about the planet, of course, and not the Mon Calamari aquatic ballet. You can't really kill dance. This whole scene is really ironic because Tarkin would be quite a different man, and in less than 2 decades later, he would destroy Alderaan without any hesitation about the culture and civilization and technology and people on that planet. Anyway, that very pleasant and well-mannered ambassador who was negotiating with Li Char ends up dying while he leaves the planet. His shuttle blows up in midair. This is the cause that Tarkin has been waiting for. No one really knows who killed the ambassador, but now Tarkin has a reason to launch a full-on invasion of the planet. By the end of the battle, the Mon Cala would be defeated, King Li Char would be arrested, and Mon Cala would be ruled by the Empire through a proxy regent. If there is one positive thing that occurs, well, during the battle, Commander Raddus of the Mon Calamari Planetary Defense Force would escape the planet with a fleet of merchant ships in tow. These vessels would ultimately form the backbone of the early Rebellion Navy, and these ships would play a crucial part in securing the Death Star plans during the Battle of Scarif. That same year, Wilhuff Tarkin would carry out the brutal subjugation of the people on the moon of Antar 4. The media would call it the Antar Atrocity. Antar 4 had sided with Count Dooku and the Confederacy of Independent Systems during the war, and so when Tarkin called for mass executions and massacres of the local populace, he didn't expect it to stir up that much controversy. Tarkin's kind of an idiot when it comes to understanding his fellow human beings, and as a result, media reports about the Antar Atrocity started really pissing off a lot of people, especially when it was revealed that a lot of Republic loyalists on Antar 4 were also killed in the massacres. Palpatine would be forced to send Tarkin off into the western reaches where he would take over the pacification operations going on there. There were still several separatist holdouts left in that region, and these groups were played up by Imperial propaganda as a much larger threat than they actually were. Also in 18 BBY, we see the Galactic Empire continue to expand into the peripherals of the galaxy. Imperial forces would set up shop on the planet of Aldhani, a little-known backwater planet that had no real significant qualities except for the fact that it was physically in the center of the sector and easy to access. The Empire would establish the Alkenzi Air Base in between two mountains, and 52 kilometers away they would dam the Holy Nasama Clain River and build a large fort and depository where all Imperial payrolls for the sector would be held in. In the next decade or so, the Empire would move the local inhabitants out of the highlands into a newly created enterprise zone in the lowlands in the southern part of the planet. The Empire had built a lot of new housing and factories, and they were trying to transform Aldhani into a hub, transit, and transport world. This type of expansion reminds me a lot of how the Roman Legion used to expand their territory. When the Roman legions reached Britain, they established the outpost known as Londinium. And around Londinium, Roman Britain would spring up. This is largely due to the fact that the payroll for the Roman Legion was actually stationed at this outpost, and as usual, money is what attracts people from all over the place. Eventually, modern London and England would spring up around that pay depository and flourish, until Londinium was invaded by Terramorphs in the 24th century and completely destroyed. By 18 BBY, the Empire would also be in the midst of finishing its operation to seize Count Dooku's massive cache of riches on Sereno. Considering how large the Imperial military would be one day, they needed every credit they could find. And finally, the Empire would also claim the planet of Illum for themselves. The Empire probably found out about this highly secretive Jedi planet when they were ransacking the Jedi Temple and archives. Illum had massive kyber crystal deposits buried beneath its surface. Jedi younglings would visit the icy planet for the Gathering Trial, where they would be united with their first kyber crystal, which they would use to construct a lightsaber. The Jedi had control of all the kyber crystal deposits in the galaxy as per an agreement they had made with the Republic. The Jedi almost worshipped the kyber crystals. They saw it as a semi-sentient entity that gave them a lot of control over the Force. Therefore, the Jedi didn't want anyone else to get their hands on these crystals. They didn't want any scientific research being done about them or these kyber crystals being used in any type of weapons manufacturing. Unless it's, of course, their lightsabers. This would make researchers like Galen Erso, one of the premier crystallographers in the galaxy, very upset. But now things were going to be different. The Empire would strip mine Illum, and by 14 BBY, the gigantic mines on the planet could be seen from space. Probably a lot of old Jedi ghosts rolling around in their ghost beds because of this. In 18 BBY, the Imperial Defense Recruitment Bill would pass. It would formalize the transition from clone troopers to civilian soldiers for the Imperial military. The officer who had proposed the bill, Admiral Edmund Rampart, would be accused of embezzling Imperial funds dedicated to the Kaminoans' cloning facilities that were supposed to be supporting the Imperial military. But he would divert those resources to his own Project War Mantle, which was designed to create the next generation of non-clone soldiers. Despite this controversy, nothing would really stop the Imperial Defense Recruitment Bill. TK Stormtrooper units would be deployed all across the galaxy soon after. Some individuals, like Senator Rio Chuchi, who we mentioned before, would be concerned about the plight of the clones that were now being decommissioned. Other clones like Captain Rex and Echo would form the Clone Underground, which would help any clones who wanted out of the Imperial military. They based themselves in the Coruscant underworld. I wonder if they ever ran into their former enemies, in the droid Gotra that were also down there. I'm sure there are a few, B-1 battle droids amongst their ranks. On the Battle of Barton 4, a small Imperial garrison is under constant attack by local insurgents. This is kind of typical for this time period in the Outer Rim. The clone units stationed there have been whittled down to just a clone commander named Mayday and his 2 troopers. Crosshair would arrive on the planet with a squad of clones, TK troopers, and a non-clone officer. The non-clone officer would force Crosshair and the clones to continue fighting the insurgents while keeping the TK troopers in reserve. Crosshair and clone commander Mayday are ordered to attack the insurgent base and manage to defeat the threat. But upon return, Mayday dies in Crosshair's arm because the non-clone officer refuses to administer aid to him. This makes Crosshair completely break down. He finally refuses to ignore the disrespect that the Empire has for clones, and he guns his own officer down, Gomer Pyle style. And lastly, Commander CC-10/994 Gray, one of the clones who executed Jedi Master Deepa Baliba during Order 66, has a moment of clarity while chasing her apprentice Caleb Doom in space. Gray realized all on his own, without the removal of the control chip, that Order 66 was wrong. He would sacrifice his life to save the Padawan that he formerly served alongside with. All across the galaxy, the clones were finding themselves in more and more difficult situations with commanders who seemed to not really care for them and were trying to get them killed. Eventually, it was clear that the Empire saw these men as cannon fodder and assets that could be easily thrown away and replaced. 18 BBY would be the last year that clone troopers would defend the citizens of the galaxy from external threats. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. See you next time.